always glad to see you, man.
So how you doing?
Time to get started, I guess. Good morning, Breakfast Clubbers.
Good morning.
Yes, you're wondering why I'm here. Well, Preacher Ernie is out doing a wedding today. That's why he asked me to do it. Yes, and he is a preacher, I guess. So, yes, Reverend. Yes. So you can find the true way with Ernie in a lot of different ways. We got a lot of different things going on. I don't know this first song, so do you have any song leaders around here? Right here? Frank, do you want to lead the Hail song?
All right, Frank. My wife said you in church, if you sing, don't. Yeah, you know, we can all do that. Oh, yeah. All right, come on and stand up. Let's see a little action around here.
Richard, stand up.
Hail, hail, the gang's all here. Everybody knows that, right? Yes. Hail,
hail, the gang's all here. Morning breakfast clubbers, morning breakfast clubbers. Chow, chow, we all want chow. That is what we're here for now.
Let's go once more. All right.
Okay.
All right. Then don't sit down yet. Let's do God Bless America just for the good measure. You know, you need to practice. You got to. It was terrible.
God bless America, land that I love, and beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Hey, that's pretty good. You guys have done worse than that.
Outstanding. Yes. Ernie would be proud of you. Well, we'll send a tape to him about it. Yeah, he's going to Tucson for a wedding, and he's going to be the reverend in it. So when you get ready to get married, I don't think he charges that much. So we have Reverend Ernie now. So we got a lot of fun with that in the future here. Exactly.
I'm not going to that church.
You will find the way if you do. Okay, announcements. Ernie's having a party, a debate party, Super Tuesday at his house, about 6 p.m. The typical Ron Paul thing. So show up, BYOB, I guess. I don't know. There's a little bit extra too. Kind of a potluck type of thing.
Where's the debate?
Say what?
Which debate where?
The Super Tuesday, this results coming in type of thing. So it's just an excuse for a party, as usual. So, yeah. And in a few minutes here, we're going to have speaker Tom Jenny. And Tom was with the Gold Institute, and now he's with Americans for Prosperity. He's the Arizona director of that. He grew up in Tucson and went to the University of
High school.
Oh, high school. Okay. And then he went to New Mexico Military Institute, Georgetown University. And he writes like I do, so. Yeah, he worked for the Institute of Justice for a while and taught high school government and economics and Spanish. Oh, excellent. Yes. So what do y'all think of the presidential election so far?
What presidential election?
Exactly. What a scam.
Who's running?
Exactly. Who's running and how much time they get. Everything's a rigged game, and it really bothers me. And I have an announcement to make about that a little later. Basically, I've been in the Liberty Movement for probably, well, since the early 80s. I got in it, a radical, so-called. George Gordon was doing videotapes saying, you know, all this government is unconstitutional, doesn't follow the Bill of Rights, and I couldn't disagree. So we went to many video conferences and learned a lot about what was going on, and it's started me on a study ever since then of just what is going on. And I think what causes all of us to gather together? We have different economic groups here, age groups, backgrounds, yet we all come together, enjoy each other's company, And it's the pursuit of liberty. And it's also probably, we got on that start of pursuit of liberty by being, a lot of us ripped off by government in some form. I've had various experiences that are just horrible. I've watched my relatives have various experiences that are horrible, and I'm sure many of you have the same stories. And so, that government, we don't make the concept of liberty, usually the government does. But what we can do is plant the seeds to get people interested in liberty, and that's one of my main goals. I think the liberty movement needs to expound greatly, even from where it is today. Even though it's exploding with the Ron Paul thing and everything, I constantly wonder how can we make it a heck of a lot bigger. And so, I don't care anymore what label it's done under. I don't care if it's done under the Republican Party, Libertarian Party, John Birch Society, Democrat Party. I don't care. Promote liberty where you're at. And that's kind of my goal. That's why I hand out thousands and thousands of flyers a year, because I figure liberty needs to invade all kinds of activist groups until they have the interest to look at what liberty means, because we have been lied to so much. In fact, I told my dad about probably a few months ago, I said, I think 80% of everything I learned growing up is a lie. Now, that's something pretty radical to say to your father, but he said, you know, you're about right. Because I wasn't saying that he lied to me, because he did not, but 80% of what we learn in this culture is just lies. And this whole society, unfortunately, mainly supports lying. It wants us to believe deceptions, a non-real perception of what's going on, so we can be led around by the nose and aid and abet whatever their agenda is, and basically pay for it. And if it involves war, send your young people to it. And it just makes me sick. So my goal is liberty. I think the Arizona Breakfast Club has the same goal. Again, it's been run by different party labels. I think we need to really start concentrating on getting rid of the labels. I mean, we use the labels, but they're tools. They're like a gun. You can use it for good or bad. I can save somebody's life with a gun, or I can murder somebody. And that's the same with a party label or any labels. So let's quit worrying about the labels and start pushing our Bill of Rights, our liberties, our self-ownership. I don't care what party name it is. And that's how I met Ernie and Donna years ago. I was at the Republican Party at the time. That was the thing to do at that time period. At least that's how I was raised. I didn't know any better, and neither did my parents. And I was a precinct committeeman. And I was down there doing my flyer thing back in the 90s. And I was putting one about the income tax on the seats, because I figured a little education needed to be done. Well, Ernie and his came in. I was a PC, so they couldn't do anything when I was dressed like I am now. But Ernie and some other people came in putting the fully informed jury amendment on the seats. And because they weren't PCs and because they weren't dressed like a Republican, they threw them all out. And I thought, yes, I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is free speech. The Republican Party pretends to be the voice of free speech. And here they're kicking these people out that are trying to affect positive change in this country. So because I was reading what he was putting on when he was putting down, I followed him out immediately. He said, give me those things. I'll finish the job, and they can't kick me out. And I did. And Ernie that year got the fully informed and jury amendment thing through the state legislature here. So basically, again, I didn't care who they were, where they were from. I didn't know them. All they knew, they were promoting something of liberty. And if we work together like that, across the Democratic line, the Republican line, who cares? So that's pretty much how I met him. Basically, I think another thing we have to think about when it comes to liberty, before our speaker speaks, is the banking situation, the Federal Reserve. And I know you've heard that 1,000 times, 1,000 sources, but what I mean by that is banking allows themselves to counterfeit so they can buy our enemies and what they do. So if we can start boycotting the banking system, because I just read on Fox Business 3 days ago that they want to, again, go to a cashless society. They want to get rid of every transaction that's not recorded, basically. So your Visa card, and even cash is rotten, but it's a lesser of evils until we can get back to gold and silver. So if we can really consider or reconsider boycotting these banks, quit using them as our convenience, because convenience is, in my opinion, the road to the concentration camp. We're giving these people information, we're giving them things they can just run our lives with. And if they get a cashless society, they're going to control every little thing we do and know where you're at 24/7. And then when you don't believe in the right way, you don't want to believe the 80% lies, You're going to be herding this to the place where they teach you a different way.
Point is, too, they push that one button and you got nothing.
Exactly. And why go there? Do you trust these people? At that point, one button away. They want to do one button. I guess Windows 8 now has one button. They can shut it off too. Do you trust these people? I don't. Anyone will lie to me 80% or even 10%, I don't trust at all.
I was going to say, just last week, I downloaded from Google Books the Federal Reserve Monster. And they're saying, we're just trying to get the information out to the public so they're aware. This book was written in August 1922.
Now, who said that?
It was called the Federal Reserve Monster. And they said, we've been working 2 years to try to get this information out. The Federal Reserve is the worst thing that's ever happened to this country. And they went through the entire list. It's a beautiful book.
And it was written in 1920.
1922!
So they started in 1920 then and finished in 22?
Well, no, they had a monthly newsletter, these two guys.
Yeah.
And they had put them onto a book. So they released the book in August. And it is a fantastic book. I recommend it. Go to Google Books. It's free. Download it, read it. It's 100 pages.
Excellent.
But what got me was 1922. We're just trying to get the people to wake up.
Now, I heard a different year. Do you know something?
No, it was 1922.
Yeah, that's outstanding. Yeah, I understand. I read in the New American about 15 years ago that Charles Lindbergh Sr. was offered something like a multi-million-dollar bribe, which back then was a king's ransom, just to vote for that act. In about 1913, I believe, about 1911. I'm sorry, and he said, "To heck with you." And his family stood up for this country for years. You know, they said, "We're not going to these foreign wars. We're not participating in these lies." And those people were promoting liberty. And had they not, in 1911 or whatever year it was, we wouldn't have any today. So it's every generation a small remnant pushing the liberty thing. And we need to more now than ever. Because counterfeiting is complete, absolute power. It's the power of a king. Because if you work for $100 and put it in society, and they print $100, and then they make us spend it between ourselves, they are always in power. Because as long as I can buy you, I can hire you as an employee, or I give you a bribe, whatever it takes to get you to shut up while I get my agenda through.
Yeah, going back 1946, Beardsley Rummel gave a speech in front of the American Bar Association in New Orleans called Taxes for Revenue Are Obsolete. Now, Beardsley Rummel was the chairman of Macy's, who instituted the Victory War Tax withholding tax. He was FDR's supervisor. And that article he points out, and you can Google it, Taxes for Revenue Obsolete. It's on lots of websites. They're shutting them down probably. But he goes in to say that the federal government does not need taxes to run because it's the sovereign. It can create the money. He said the state and local governments are a different story because they don't have the authority to create their own money. But Beardsley Rummel should know, and he says the reason for the tax code is to reward and punish behavior. And he also goes on to there talk about how the evil corporate tax is, how that's a double taxation and so on and so forth. This is 1946, which is even, it's after that, but still, that's seasoned a long time in there. And it's basically what it is. It's Beardsley Rummel, R-U-M-L, and it's I found it in the law library with Virgil Cooper probably 25 years ago in the American Affairs magazine. We were just snooping around, and Virgil come across that and said, "Hey, read this one." So I did. I said, "Did you read it?" He said, "No, not yet." So Virgil read it, and that's what it was.
It'd be nice to post some of these different things you guys are bringing up on Freedom Phoenix again, so a whole modern crowd can get in on it, and on Daily Paul, because you've got all the college students on there. So, again, my goal is to invade different groups with liberty. So, Tea Party, I don't care. I don't agree with everything the Tea Party does, of course, but invade them. Just about a third of the people hate the crap that's going on.
Article 1, Section 10, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. Supreme law of the land.
Exactly. Well, the Supreme Law, these people have bought their way out of the Supreme Law, literally. And that's why I say consider 5 different ways you can invade liberty in different spots that you go around, your church, wherever, and 2, start boycotting the banks a lot more.
Can you get the preachers to tell their congregation that this is usury to the nth or money system is?
Exactly. Well said. Yes. Yes, absolutely. The preachers don't preach the real, the law, the 10 Commandments, whatever. They don't follow any of it. Yeah, usury is not, until we get rid of usury, the liberty that we all seek is never going to happen. because they can buy our opposition. They're buying them. The second, if they let them banks fail in '08 like they should have, there would be no one foreclosing people's houses. There wouldn't be all these homeless people. But they allow them to live, and we can never survive in liberty. We survive as slaves. We don't survive in liberty. So, a couple more announcements. I handed out a piece of paper. Thane asked me to run for a Congress in District 8 down there in the Bisbee area. And I, quite frankly, didn't want to do it because I'm not really into that. They say that most people that run for office are sociopaths, and I really don't want to be acquainted with that. Because there's an element of truth. When you want to control others, there's a sociopathness about you. So the only reason I'm running is I was asked,
Any more of those?
these Congress things? Or Tom Jennings?
Oh, Jennings.
Yes, go ahead, pass it around there.
Pass it down.
But anyway, the Libertarian ticket needs a seat. And when I think about when I was at the state convention, the Republican state convention just a month ago, I sat in there and watched Ron Paul flyers all up and down the seats being picked up by the leaders and thrown in the trash. And I thought, if that's the Republican Party that's doing the same thing they did to Ernie Hancock 20 years ago, I'm going to run for Congress on the Libertarian ticket.
Keith, when was this that they were doing this?
The Republican state convention. Hundreds of them.
The state convention.
Yeah, the main, the January, they have the big January party. It's the biggest meeting of the year.
What if we did the same thing to their literature?
Oh, exactly.
Throw it away.
Yeah, it's a rigged game. They're picking up Ron Paul flyers, throwing them in the trash. There's 100 Ron Paulers that I could have handed them. We could have at least recycled this stuff. But no, they threw it in the trash. They rigged the Maine election. They lied and rigged the Iowa election. They're constantly rigging things. There's no so-called democracy in any of it. So for that reason, Thane asked me to run. I said, I'll go ahead and do it. It's only a 6-month term, basically. More initially, he gave me this form. It's 1 page. You don't have to be registered to vote. You don't have to be whatever. And you can go ahead and all these Republicans that voted for like the NDAA and those type of things, we can run a Libertarian in those seats. And that would be you guys. If you're interested, the ones that voted for that foul bill to throw you in jail without trial, there needs to be a Libertarian on the tickets. And every time the Republican Party pulls these stunts, there needs to be a reaction. We are in this country, not these socialist, fascists, whatever they are, communists, whatever. So basically, if you're interested in running for Congress, Thane asked me to look for other people that would like to run too. You just fill out the one form. You're a write-in candidate. I believe around, what is it, May, April?
June is the election.
Well, for the special election, but I'm talking about the other one. You need to get this in the next month, in other words, a month and a half.
The deadline for this form is this Thursday.
For everybody?
Yeah, for everybody.
Oh, everybody. Oh, okay. Thank you. I almost screwed that one up. So, yeah, you just fill this one paper out, drop it off to the Secretary of State, and you're running on a Libertarian ticket as a write-in candidate in the Libertarian primary. You need about 20 votes. The email will go out to that effect, and you will be on the general ballot after that, because if you get the 20 votes, your name is written on the general. And that general ballot is where you want to be, because then you're in the debates. And you can just preach on and talk about these things. And we can talk about how the Republican Party rigs different things. We can talk about counterfeiting. We can talk about whatever the heck we want. We can talk about we're saving this country. And again, we're not, whether we're going to win or not is not the issue. The issue is the bully pulpit. So seriously consider, I'm going to have a little, if you're interested in this, meet with me and Thane after this meeting, and we'll try to get you a spot. I don't want to see, personally, I'm just being frank, I don't want to see a bunch of anti-gun Democrats, forgive me, in Congress. So we got to be, if the congressman didn't vote for the NDAA or trash like that, maybe we should run in that thing. They may disagree with me totally on that. But for these idiots like Kyle, and McCain, and these other ones that are doing all this trash, I think at least half of them have voted for the bad stuff. So they need the Libertarian in that ticket at minimum. So, because again, we get the debates. So with that, we've got a great speaker, Tom Jenny. I've seen him in the parking lots when I'm out in the parking lots putting flyers out for years. He believes in the same thing I do, invade for liberty. He works for American Prosperity. I have a lot of questions about that group. and about its funding. He's going to give us some answers about it, and we can all learn a little more. So, Tom, thanks for coming. And
like your good friend Ernie, I'm the kind of guy that doesn't really need a microphone. I'm one of those guys. Nice to meet you all, or see some of you again. And I see Thane quite a bit. I see Keith quite a bit. Keith, you actually came to our lunch, I think, in 2007. We had an awards lunch. I think Ron Gould won the award that year. And he may be moving his way toward Congress at this point. So that's one of the reasons my group exists. We started off as something called the Arizona Federation of Taxpayers, which have been operating in the state since about 1980, and they produced a state legislative scorecard since 1984. We a lot of old time. I don't know if anybody remembers Gary Giordano. Kind of ran the thing for a while, and anyway, we've had lots of folks. Bob and Judy Burgess ran it in the early part of the last decade, and then all of our board members kept moving on into the legislature. So we had a bunch of people move on. Judy Burgess is now in the legislature. Lori Klein, Debbie Lesko. Anyway, a lot of these people, Rick Murphy, they all kind of end up going to the legislature, and I kept staying away from that game. But I got involved with them. I was at Goldwater in 2002 to 2004, and I started working with those guys and helping them with their scorecard a little bit. And then they, at the time, Bob and Judy, I think, were not really into email, and they said, "Well, you guys, younger guys, you take this thing over. We're going to do something else, but why don't you take this over? You guys do email." Well, now everybody does email, but at the time, I think they were like, forget it. Why don't you take this thing, bring it into the 21st century? So Chad Kirkpatrick and Rick Murphy and I kind of took over in about 2004 with the Arizona Federation of Taxpayers, and we started working on that and continuing the scorecard and doing the brown bag lunches down at the legislature. And then about 2006, this group, Americans for Prosperity, which came out of the old Citizens for a Sound Economy, their management started coming to Arizona and talking to people and saying, "Hey, we want to set up a state chapter for Arizona. We want to create an Arizona chapter of Americans for Prosperity." And everybody who they talked to said, "Well, don't reinvent the wheel. Tom Jennings already doing that." So that's how we ended up moving in with AFP. So we've been a state chapter with AFP since 2007. We're a nonpartisan group. We don't endorse any candidates or anything like that, so I just said that as a way of disclaimer before I say the next thing, which is I've got the kind of sad feeling that this may be my last chance, or last Tuesday was my last chance to vote for Ron Paul in my lifetime, because I'm not planning to move to Texas.
Yeah, I think Ron Paul's maybe running for VP.
Okay. Well, who knows? I kind of have this weird feeling. I've been following the guy. I think I started reading about him when I was in college at Georgetown, about 1991, 90, something like that. So I've been reading the guy a long time, and I just have a strange feeling it's my last chance. Who knows? We'll see what happens. I mean, a lot of stuff happens, but yeah, I'm not planning to run. And who knows? Maybe he'll be back in 2016. He might be, as you say, he might be doing things here in November. Who knows? But anyway, so that's kind of a little bit about my background and where we came from on this whole thing. We're a grassroots taxpayer group. There was a guy who was running for president about 4 years ago, and he told the country famously that the people, Americans, tend to cling to their guns and their Bibles. And we, I usually explain to people say it's the elevator speech. What do you do? What are you guys about? And I say we are the NRA of fiscal conservatism. If you are mad at the NRA at any particular moment, as many people in the gun movement tend to be, then maybe we're the GOA of fiscal conservatism, or JPFO, or whatever you like. But our goal is to help you all hang on to your wallets and your bank accounts and your retirement accounts with the same tenacity, fierce tenacity that a lot of us cling to our guns and Bibles. So that's it in a nutshell. We have an official mission statement you can find on the website somewhere. I don't know what it is. I mean, I know I've read it and all that, but I don't have it memorized. So that's what we are. We're a grassroots group. Big thing I want to talk to you today is about how you can be effective in trying to poke government and try to get it to move a little bit. It's difficult, as you know.
it's difficult to move this thing, but I have some ideas maybe on how you can poke it and try to get it to move sometimes. And I'll kind of start at the top level of government, which I'm glad to say at this very moment is not world government. I'm glad we're not dealing with that particular issue exactly right now. Although I know a lot of you, how many of you are concerned about Agenda 21? Okay, yeah. So you got to keep that world government thing in the back of your mind, I guess. But
Tom, excuse me. What is Agenda 21? I'm sorry.
You're not familiar with Agenda 21?
No, I'm not.
It's basically United Nations environmental movement that's run, and it's attempting to co-opt governments at various levels around the world to get them to get on the same program. And it's not really, I don't think it counts as a conspiracy theory because it's all the documents are out there in the open, and it's typical kind of, in many ways, it's typical NGO work where allied groups are going in trying to convince local governments around the world and the national government here to try to go along with certain environmental planning ideas. Okay. So anyway, that's, but I know a lot of people are concerned about that sort of thing. So anyway, but at this moment, we don't have a world government, and we should probably keep it that way. And so your next problem down the list is Congress and the presidency. That is extreme to move that thing. It is really, really big. How many of you been to DC? Have you noticed that it's the only place in America where there are construction cranes as far as the eye can see. They're continuing to build new buildings there for all the new government workers that they are creating with everything they've been doing. And it was grown like gangbusters throughout the George W. period, throughout the Clinton period. I lived in Washington, D.C. In the Clinton era and a little bit into the George W. era. And that's the only place in my life where I've just seen cranes, building cranes, as far as the eye can see, continually building. If that was the picture of the U.S. economy as a whole, that might be a nice thing. If we were continually growing and this economy was just going gangbusters, but that is not actually the case in the rest of the economy, as you know. Washington, D.C. for the last few years has been the only place in America where you see building cranes and new buildings and new apartments and new offices going up on and on and on. And that's probably a really bad thing if you think about it.
Beijing.
Yeah, Beijing. Oh, no, I meant in the United States.
No, I know.
Yeah,
they're doing
right.
pretty good too.
Yeah, that's right. They're growing. China's been growing like gangbusters as well. So, but a lot of that is actually productive activity. Whereas I think most of y'all would agree that most of what's going on in government right now is not productive activity. So there are people getting big jobs. They're getting six-figure jobs, doing a lot of stuff that you probably disagree with. And there's a whole lot of them, and they're filling up a whole lot of apartment buildings in Washington, D.C. It's growing like gangbusters. Okay, so that's my way of saying that Congress is a big problem. Obviously, as you guys know, as you know, the guys who are there are mostly doing things that are unconstitutional, that are completely outside of the bounds of the Constitution. So it's a big and poking this thing is really tough. How many of you have ever you guys are a little smarter than this, but how many of you have ever maxed out, given the maximum amount to someone who is running for Congress? Okay, well, glad you haven't done that, and I would suggest strongly that you don't do that if you want to be effective. There is so much money going into Congress right now, into elections and all that, that the only way you can be effective is to leverage whatever you are giving. You basically have to bundle. If you want to influence someone in Congress, even wealthy enough or crazy enough to write someone the maximum check, which is I think $5,000 total right now for someone running for Congress in a particular year. You're running for Congress, so.
Yes, I won't take more than $5,000. Because you got to fill out all this financial.
In front of everybody.
Yeah. So, anyway, so let's say you could max out and write a $5,000 check, all right, to someone who's running for Congress. The good news is they will return your phone call. If you call them, they will return. That'll happen. They will call. But will you have any kind of real influence on them? And the short answer is no. Because in the game that they're playing, $5,000 is nothing. Now in our world, I'm guessing, just because I'm guessing you're kind of like me a little bit, $5,000 is a big deal in our world. In their world, it's not a big deal. It's a very, very small thing. So if you're going to get involved with someone for Congress, in funding people who are running for Congress, even if you like the person, I would suggest find an organization that is bundling, that is pulling together a lot of contributions, something like Club for Growth. Club for Growth is an organization that goes out there and decides which people they like, people they think are going to be hardcore fiscal conservatives, and what they do is they put good housekeeping seal of approval. They pick candidates they think are really good. They pick incumbents who have a good record as they see it. You have to decide if you like their agenda, but basically what they are then able to do is drop $500,000 on one of these candidates. They take your check and your check and your check and my check, they bundle them all together, and they put a real pile of money in front of these guys and say, the only reason you're getting this money is because we said you're a good candidate, or we said you're a good congressperson. That's leverage. Same thing I would also say about being involved with national organizations. Unfortunately, at level, there's very, very little you could do as one individual to change things. You could douse yourself with gasoline and light yourself, please don't, but you could douse yourself with gasoline, light yourself on fire on the Congressional Mall, and that would be an interesting news story for one day. And you would have given it all, and there's nothing you can do to and you won't change anybody's minds. It'll be interesting. Like, remember Thane, that guy? He set himself on fire. And, that was really interesting. Wow, yeah, that's weird. Okay, and so what I'm saying is, as an individual, it's very, very hard to poke these guys and do something. Every once in a while, you get some video that someone puts out on YouTube, and it goes viral, and one guy did it, and it kind of shakes people up a little bit. But for the most part, you have to be part of a big organization. That's why National Rifle Association is so influential. It's because they've got the numbers. And everybody's writing their $35 a year check or whatever it is to NRA, and they're putting all that together, and they're putting a lot of pressure on these individuals. That's how you get real influence, is by being there. Another thing I would tell you is that if you're with an organization like ours, a lot of what we do at the national level, we've got now close to 2 million members nationwide. We do end up swinging a lot of weight that way. If you're sending in emails to Congress, it helps if there are, not just because they're not going to read one email. In fact, they're not going to read thousands of emails. What they do now is they pile them up. They say, okay, we're thinking about this bill, the whatever it is, Defense Authorization Act, and we've got 25,000 emails that come in today against it. And over here we've got 35,000 from people who are for it. Or whatever, I don't know. I'm just a total example like that. That's the level that's what they're doing in Congress. They count them on those levels. So it helps to be part of a national organization. And if there's a national organization you like, and they ask you to send in an email, it does help. Because you're sending it in, but so are thousands of other people nationwide. So at some point it then weighs in, they go, gosh, a lot of people writing in on this thing. This must be important. I better take another look at this. I better not just listen to what the lobbyists told me, because there's a lot of people out there who told me this is a bad deal. Lobbyists just told me it was a good deal, but here's all these people shaking my tree. So it helps at that level. Congress is just so big. It's very, very hard to influence unless you're part of something big. Does anybody know how many people are in a typical congressional district right now?
About 800,000?
Yeah, about 800,000. Yeah, it used to be 600. A few years ago it was 600, but now it's more like 800,000. Does anybody know under the Constitution, Ed knows this, you can't answer. Okay. Does anybody know what is the minimum number per district?
30.
Who said 30? 30,000? Yeah. 30,000 per district. That's the minimum number. Districts are not supposed to be any smaller than that. But obviously 30,000 versus 800,000 is a pretty big difference. So do you know how many members, just simple math, how many members of Congress we'd have right now if we kept it at that original kind of level of 30,000?
Too many.
We'd have 10,000 members of Congress.
It might be represented a little bit better.
Yeah, well, that's the point. Is like New Hampshire. That's a huge problem if you think about it. This government was built on a scale where there was supposed to be one person representing 30,000 people. Now, with technology, maybe you can have more communication, you can have a bigger district, but if you think about it, we are way, way out of proportion to what things were supposed to be. So anyway, that's my big point about that, is just you got to be part of something big. When you get emails from us, if you're part of our email network, and I'll send this thing around so you can get on it, if you're getting our email alerts, A lot of what we send out is not going to sound super hardcore because your neighbors are not super hardcore. The whole point is to try to get people involved in stuff. You know, if you try to, how many of you have tried to convert your friends and neighbors to your worldview? You sit them down with coffee and you sit there for 2 hours and yeah, it's that's probably I'm not saying it won't work. Sometimes you meet some kid who just really wants to learn everything and it works, you know, but for the most part, you got to drip this stuff to your friends. You got to drip it piece by piece to your friends because they're not going to sign up for the whole package. It also helps if whatever you give them sounds really sane and normal and is kind of common sense. Like we'll have an action alert out. In fact, this is so sane and common sense that we got a lot of Democrats to sign on to this thing. We think it's a bad idea for the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, Federal Communications Commission, under Mr. Julius Janikowski. We think it's a bad idea for that outfit to try to regulate the internet like a public utility. Last time I checked, public utilities are not big on innovation. They just kind of go along and do what the government tells them to do. They charge the price the government tells them to do. Yeah, right. Yeah, and they do these goofy things, invasive things that, yeah. So, like you said, with smart meters. So, and yet this is so. And by the way, what was wrong with the internet? I mean, last time I checked, it was one of the only things that actually worked in this economy. So you and your neighbors know that too, and so you tell them, wow, the federal government under this guy Julius Janikowski, Obama appointee, is trying to take over the internet and run it like a utility. Basically tell ISPs and everybody else what they can charge. It's a crazy, weird thing. So you tell that to your neighbor and they go, yeah, that's weird and crazy. Plus then you can add a little conspiracy angle, which is not that far off. What happens when the government regulates these things? Eventually they start dictating content. Eventually you get something like the Fairness Doctrine in radio, where the government is telling radio people what to put on. Does anybody know what the story was with the sort of Fairness Doctrine concept when FDR took over in '32? You had the government came in, by the way, with no good reason and said, yes, we own the radio waves now. In the 20s, they came in and said, we own the radio, all radio waves. And so anybody who wants to broadcast now has to go to the government and get a license. Well, in the 20s, it was bad enough because you had to get a license, but at least you only had to get a license every 2 years. FDR gets in, he starts doing a lot of big government stuff, and people start squawking and complaining about it on the radio. So he changes the licensing scheme to 6 months. So that you as a radio station owner are going to have to go back to the government and get another license every 6 months. And pay fees. But you're thinking very carefully at that point as a radio station owner about what your people are saying on the radio and what they're saying about FDR and his federal regulators. Because those same people are going to be, you're going to be going to them every 6 months to try to get a license. Anyway, that's the sort of thing that eventually happens on the long end when you start trying to regulate government, when you start trying to regulate something like the internet as a and we can get into long haul, short haul. It's the same thing they did with railroads in the late 19th century. And I'm a big fan of Grover Cleveland. He's probably my favorite president. He was a Democrat. I usually phrase it the other way. Say my favorite president was a Democrat elected in '92 whose last name begins with CL, and the people go, Clinton? You know. So, and actually, Clinton. If you think about it, Clinton doesn't look so bad anymore, does he? I mean, you know, it's all relative at some point. So Clinton doesn't look all that bad anymore. But no, Grover Cleveland was a fantastic president, I think. But he actually, I think, screwed up in 1887. He helped create the Interstate Commerce Commission. Which was part of that whole railroad thing. And anyway, we're trying to do the same thing. We about killed the railroad industry in this country, and we're trying very hard now to, I guess, to try to kill the internet. So anyway, my point is, if you send our action alert, if you get on our email list, and we send something out like that, and if you forward it to your friends, maybe they'll take action on that, and they'll go, gosh, you know, Frank sent me something, and it seemed pretty sane, and you know, anyway, and then you kind of drip it to them. That's what I would suggest you do with your friends and neighbors. It's a big thing. You'll have to put that pen back on the.
I won't steal it.
Yeah, family. Yeah, family's tough. Don't try to convert your family members. That never works. I think in any sphere. So that's an idea. Is be part of something big. Oh, by the way, when you're forwarding emails, it helps to individualize it. everybody, how many of you get too little email? Like you're not getting enough email. I didn't think that was the problem. Somehow I didn't, because that's not my problem. I have to delete about like 400 or 500 emails a day, and a lot of them are from people I know, but they're just forwarded. If it says in the subject line, Tom, can you take a look at this? Oh, okay. Frank just sent me something that says, Tom, take it. Okay, so I kind of open it, and then it says, from Frank, it says, hey, Tom, I was looking at this. I think this is a really important issue. Do you think you would think about taking action on this? And then I got to go, gosh, Frank just asked me to take action on this. So I got to read the thing, and then I go, gosh, well, that seems pretty simple. All right, so that's how you get your friends to do it, not just by forwarding stuff that goes into their junk mail. If it does go into their junk mail filter, it helps if it has their name on it in the subject line, because you're scanning. Does anybody scan through the long list of stuff that went in the junk mail? And then and you just see all this stuff. But if you see your name on there, if it says Thane, then you're suddenly like, ooh, wait, I better read this one. So then you take it out of the junk mail. So anyway, that's how to get to your friends and neighbors on these issues. So that's usually important. Let's go down a level to, I also suggest, I don't know how many of you are of the religious persuasion, or a religious persuasion, but on the Supreme Court, pray. That's all you can do. I mean, because if you want a majority on that court to decide something for you, that's 5 people. 5 people with beating hearts. Any one of those hearts at any moment can stop beating. And there is nothing any of you, I mean, unless you want to become like, let's say you like Clarence Thomas, because he's probably the most hardcore constitutionalist on there's nothing you can do. You could maybe offer to become Clarence Thomas's personal trainer and make sure that he's, taking his statins or whatever. But other than that, there's nothing you can do other than pray. So I throw that in there, and my apologies to the non-religious and all that. Legislature. This state legislature, for better or for worse, is probably the most conservative state legislature in the country. Probably. Whether you like that, whether some issues you like that and some issues you don't like that, this is a legislature that is very, very conservative. If you're talking about fiscal conservative type issues, the kind of stuff we do as an organization, this is a great legislature to work with. Also, they are likely to return your email. They're likely to return your phone call. It's a much smaller world. There's 120,000 people roughly in a legislative district, something like that. Very, very few of them are interested. Very few of them can actually tell you who their legislator is. If you actually know the name of your legislators, your 2 representatives and your senator for your district, and you establish some kind of rapport, you go see them when they go speak somewhere, you see them at a legislative district meeting, you actually have, those are people you will actually be in contact with, and it behooves them to pay attention to you and what you say. So that's an area where you're going to have a lot of influence, is this Arizona State Legislature. Especially if you happen to lean Republican, constitutionalist, libertarian. You don't have to pull out your libertarian card when you talk to your Republican legislator, but you just tell them you're a constituent. Make sure, Anyway, that's the sort of thing. Or one thing that's really clever is if you find a bill you liked that they did, like they just say, you're a gun rights guy, they just voted on some gun rights, you can find out if that legislator voted on it, and then send them a note saying, thank you for voting. They love that word, thank you, because they're always looking for people to actually thank them, because most people in the state hate them. So if you send them a thank you note, say, hey, thank you for voting, for my gun rights, my self-defense rights on whatever bill. By the way, I was hoping you would look at this bill and vote. You can. That's the sort of thing you can do to get. And these guys are likely to read that email. In many cases, they're sitting in committee hearings with nothing to do because there's really boring testimony going on, and they're looking at their email. And so that may come up. So who knows? There's an ALIS system. Does anybody know ALIS? ALIS, the Arizona Legislative Information System. You can. You need to kind of stay on top of it because you'll have to figure out when bills are going into. But that's a way you can register. You can be on the record. You can actually type in from your home. You have to do it down there for once, or you have to do it through me. If you tell me, hey, Tom, I want to get on ALIS, I'll go down and register you, send you a password and your name and stuff like that, and then you can change your password because you don't want me entering stuff in on your behalf. Maybe you do. Anyway, so that's a level of government where you can have a huge impact. We want to get to Q&A pretty quick. So let me just skip real quickly. I'll tell you what not to do. One thing you should not do is run for school board. I think you can do actually, everything I tell you is about 95% correct. So there are exceptions. There's always exceptions to everything, usually. So I would urge you not to run for school board unless you've really got a plan. Because if you want to be the lone whistleblower, you must survive a couple of terms on school board. It's very, very hard to actually get a true majority of fiscal conservatives on a school board before the political forces that run school districts push you out. It's very, very difficult. Or they co-opt you. It's very difficult. Now, you guys are all pure people who will not be co-opted by politics, but they play a lot of really funny games. You get conservatives especially get on school boards, and they start going around, they say, wow, I want to change the curriculum because it's godless and hates the, anti-American or whatever. I want to change the curriculum. And so the people who run the district will come to you and say, well, gosh, we don't have enough money. Boy, that's a really good idea. I can't tell everybody else, but I really believe you're right about that curriculum. I think we need to change that curriculum because it really is godless and anti-American. But you know what? That's a long process. Oh, and by the way, we need money for that. So if you help us pass this next override so we can get our budget up, then we'll come back and we'll set up a commission, we'll set up a study panel, and we'll put some money toward your study panel so that we can then maybe look at some textbooks in Texas that are produced in Texas that might be better for this district. And we might actually get new textbooks in about 15 years. So that's kind of how the game goes. So it's really, really tough to change it. I think the best things that are happening in education are not happening through school boards. The best things that are happening right now are kids getting out of the system, are kids going to independent charter schools where the management is able to switch on a dime and choose a new way of teaching. Best things that are happening are kids going to private schools with a tuition tax credit or just on their own. There's homeschooling. There's internet learning. There's a lot of great stuff that's happening not through the old district school board system. So a lot of people, it's their heart's desire to run for school board. Okay, I'll talk to you about that. I'll talk about, we can talk about things you might be able to get done, but it's tough. That's a tough nut to crack. Cities, depending on what cities you live in, is anybody not from Scottsdale or Phoenix? Where you live? Mesa?
Tempe.
Mesa, Tempe?
Mesa.
Mesa? Glendale, Peoria. If you set up a dedicated blog, now this is a bit of a long-term project. This might take 5 years. But if you do what Anita Christie did in Gilbert, she set up something called gilbertwatch.com, and she started studying the city government and looking at all the crazy, stupid stuff they were spending money on, and created an email list and sent it out to her friends. And pretty soon, everybody in Gilbert who was sharp was paying attention. And by the way, including the Arizona Republic reporters, they started having to read her blog in order to figure out what's going on. You can become immensely powerful in terms of shaping ideas just by focusing on a little area like Gilbert and get word out about what government's doing and trying to change that stuff. So Anita was hugely influential that way. Then she got involved with the Tea Party movement, she probably was from the beginning, but she got involved with Tea Party type people, and then she creates this sort of political action organization around her. She's got people going to the city council meetings, raising hell at city council meetings about the issues that she's talking about, and eventually they put together a slate of Tea Party candidates, and they took over the Gilbert City Council. First they stopped the Prop 406 sales tax increase, and then they got a majority of people on the city council. And they're doing a lot of things. They're moving their city elections to November, which is a nice thing. How many of you typically vote in November? Ernie will tell you, I won't tell Ernie. Ernie tells you not to vote, right?
No, he asked why you're still voting.
He asked why you're still voting, yeah. So it's kind of open-ended. It's kind of rhetorical. Like he maybe is...
I think...
I know he's for office every once in a while.
He mocks the accounting of it. That's
Yeah,
what he's mocking.
yeah.
It might be better to have it not in November because there's a lower turnout, so only people who pay attention are going to show up.
Yeah, that's...
You don't have any of the sheep showing up.
That's a great philosophy. If you're inside of government and you want to run government as a pro-government machine, which is basically how most cities work. The city machine and the city workers and their unions, they elect the people who decide what is done with the money, and who often decide how much money there is. So that's how you get this vicious circle of the people who are running cities are elected mainly by the people who work in cities.
Okay.
And so that's a problem because the average taxpayer usually, God bless them, is not paying attention to politics. They're not political. Like, I don't know what in the world you guys are doing on a Saturday morning. I mean, what are we doing? We are not normal people. Think about this. What are we doing here on a Saturday? Yeah, no. No, what am I doing? What am I doing talking about politics on a Saturday morning in March? And what are you doing listening? I mean, we're not quite normal in here. The normal people out there, they don't even know if there's an election in March or May or August. They have no clue. They do know, oh yeah, big presidential elections happen sometime, and then it turns out it's November of even numbered years. And we're trying to fix that. We want all city elections in Arizona to be in November of even numbered years. That way people have a one-stop shop. They go to their ballot. By the way, it'll save money because you don't have to run all these little elections. You just consolidate everything. That way, when people know they've got to vote, they go. And that's, by the way, that's when they start coming to you. They come to you because you know about this stuff, and they know you're the kind of weirdo that hangs out on Saturday morning and listens to politics. So they come to you a couple months before an election, or usually it's probably about 2 weeks before when they get that mail-in thing, and if they're even on the mail-in list. But they come to you fairly soon before that, and then you can walk them through the entire ballot and say, oh, this city council election, it's down here near the bottom, but it's really important. And then you tell them who to vote for, if they trust you. Or gently suggest if they don't trust you. But anyway, that's it. That's my spiel on how you can get involved and possibly poke this government thing around. Thanks. I'll do Q&A.
Does the left operate primarily the same way you do, or do you operate primarily the same way you do, organizationally? Not different issues, but it's the same.
Yeah, it's the same.
The same mechanics.
Yeah, it's basically going to be the same thing. You have there's a pipeline of ideas. You start with ideas in the universities, and left-wingers have a lot of influence in universities. Then they push things into think tanks. So they write legislation, or they dream up ideas about sort of ideal legislation. They have grassroots movement, things like MoveOn.org, things like that are grassroots. And then at the dirty end of the pipeline are the politicians. And they have whole systems for recruiting and electing politicians. So
yeah, because I hear you hear the criticism from the left of Americans for Prosperity, how bad, evil, wicked, nasty you are. Is that because you're more effective and more organized than they are, doing the same thing on different issues?
Yeah, if you're a hardcore leftist, then yeah, we are all of those things. All those adjectives. From your point of view, no, you're right. It's basically the structure of social change. How do you change society? And you start with ideas, and you eventually want those ideas to get into action.
So listening to Ed Schultz, which I can't listen to him anymore. I used to listen to him 20 years ago when he was semi-sensible, and on local radio up in North Dakota, and he's criticized the Koch brothers for this money into the Tea Party. But I never heard him mention George Soros.
I mean, it's the same thing. And unless you're a hardcore conspiracy theorist, a couple of billionaires are not going to run anything. I mean, it's a gigantic country. Okay, so what if these guys have billions, a few $1 billion, and this is an economy that's $14 trillion. So George Soros, I'm not a huge fan of everything the guy does, but he's not pushing the world around. I mean, he's funding a lot. He gave a lot of seed money to get things like MoveOn to, going, and he funds a lot of Democratic candidate-oriented stuff. But is George Soros single-handedly moving the political scene in America? I don't think so. He's just he's a guy,
Buying a lot of gold, I'll tell you that.
Well, and the other thing about a guy like George Soros, I'm assuming just from what I've seen that he's not stupid. So he's not going to keep throwing money at organizations. I mean, if the world isn't going his way, if his ideas don't get some sort of cachet out there, if he's not able to attract large numbers of people, he's probably going to stop funding that. But yeah, I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist on that level. I don't think George Soros is running the left. I don't think the Koch brothers are running the right. So, yeah.
Tom, you just mentioned that the Arizona State Legislature is the most fiscally conservative in the nation. I would beg to differ. I think that's a mathematical impossibility because these law and order, mandatory sentencing, lock them up and throw away the key atmospheres that are created by such legislatures like Arizona, create essentially a boon for the cops and the prison guard unions while bankrupting our state. We don't need all these prisons. We don't need to pay $30,000 to $50,000 a year per prisoner when so many of the people in prisons are simply low-level drug offenders. And specifically with that, I want to comment in just a moment, but before I do, you probably know a gentleman named Mark Burno, used to be with the Goldman Institute.
Bertovich. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, Burno, yeah. He went from the Goldman Institute to being a lobbyist for Corrections Corporation of America. If that isn't the height of hypocrisy, I don't know what is. Your comments on both of my statements, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the right, generally speaking, the right tends to have a big soft spot. Actually, and if we expand it to the federal level, it's the military spending. So at the local level, it's law enforcement. Everybody's got this. Most people out there have some area of government that they think needs to be increased or strengthened, or at least needs to be held firm, and they'd like to cut with it. And for the most part, your Republicans tend to be people who think that law enforcement either doesn't have enough money or absolutely couldn't see any budget cuts. And so that tends to be what you get on the right side of the ledger. So, and I'm more of the, I mean, there's huge areas of government that I'd like to cut. And even, with military and law enforcement, I believe in something, a good friend of mine, one of my best friends is of the Jewish persuasion. And he has something he calls the circumcision principle, which is that you can cut 10% off the top of anything. So when someone tells me, "Oh, we can't cut law enforcement," oh yeah, we can. I mean, it's unbelievable some of the waste that's going on in law enforcement and the military budget. I mean, we can cut at least 10%,
but with that
without even hurting any.
But Tom, with that in mind, how can you say that Arizona's legislature is the most fiscally conservative in the nation?
Oh, okay. Because I'll do that the state and the federal. Although I won't say we're not the most fiscally conservative anything at the federal level. But this legislature, if you look at our whole state budget, close to 50% is K-12 and universities, and it might even be a little bit above 50%. If you take all the K-12 universities, community college, that's 50% of the state budget, the general fund budget. Access, which is Medicaid, is another 25% of our state budget. So those things are 75% of our state budget. Corrections and law enforcement is about 10, maybe if you count the stuff that goes through DPS that comes from the highway, maybe about 10, 12 at a stretch, 15% of our budget. But mostly, by the time we're talking about stuff, it's probably about 10% of this budget. So what I'm saying is that these guys who I'm saying are pretty darn fiscally conservative, they cut 20% out of the state budget. Now, it took a lot longer than I wanted. I wanted it to happen a lot more quickly. But they finally, over the last 4 years, have cut 20% out of the state budget. And a large part of that has come from that 75%, and from the other little bits have come from the 75%, and a lot of it has come from the remaining 25% that is not the law enforcement. And they haven't really cut law enforcement very much. There have been little cuts, but not much in law enforcement. But my whole point is, if law enforcement is 10% of the budget, and these guys are cutting large amounts out of the rest of the budget, that's still a lot of budget cutting going on. Maybe not as much as I'd like, but everybody's got their pet area. This is the same thing with the federal picture, in a way. I don't want to defend Republicans who just want to throw money at the military budget. I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. So, but if you look at our federal military budget, it is, if you look at everything we do, and you look at the long-term picture of what's causing us to go bankrupt, we could go to a volunteer militia, zero federal military spending, and this country will be bankrupt in 50 years. I mean, I guess we're technically bankrupt if you accrue everything and bring it forward, but we will actually feel the pinch, and we'll be paying outrageous interest rates on our federal debt and all this other stuff, and people will be, no one will lend us money in 50 years. We'll be way underwater. Complete. I guess insolvent's a better word. Yeah, we'll be insolvent in 50 years, even if we went to a zero military budget. Just because the size of the military budget, it's huge, gigantic, but as a portion of the federal government, it's not that big. I mean, it's worth cutting, but it's not that big.
What is a portion of the budget that's military spending right now?
Of the current federal military spending, is, I believe, in the ballpark of $500 billion if you include the supplementals for things like, and you know how that game is played.
And throw in the wars. I mean,
throw in the wars. So if you put supplementals for the wars and stuff like that, then you get upwards of $1 trillion on $3.8 trillion, which is now we're talking about a third of the budget. So it's big, or 25%. Yeah, it's huge. And you can't balance the federal budget right now, especially with the entitlements. If we're going to keep entitlement promises to people, there's absolutely no way you can balance the federal budget right now, and especially long term, without doing some military cuts.
Thank you.
It's got to happen. Thank you.
Let's presume for the moment that the powers that be are so firmly entrenched that there's nothing the activists of this country are going to do to change, and that it continues to increase. At what percentage of taxation does John Q. Public stand up and say no more?
100%.
What's it going to take? What percentage?
It takes a lot. It depends. I think America has a lower threshold for that, but
Your opinion.
Culturally,
Give me a number. Give me a percentage number. When does John Q. Public stand up and say, that's it?
that's tough to say. I'll give you a story that I think illustrates this. Argentina, 100 years ago, was one of the 5 wealthiest countries in the world. When immigrants were coming out of Europe, saying, some of them probably flipped a coin to try to figure out were they going to go where their cousins went in Argentina, or were they going to go where their cousins went in the United States of America. And that is a country that has killed itself economically and to some extent socially. One of the things that happens when you kill yourself economically is eventually you get a military dictator. They basically shot themselves in the foot over and over and over with fiscal policy, with economic policy, with regulations, with monetary chaos, to the point where they are now a third world country. It's a poor country. But it took them a long, long time to get there. And for many decades, people say, hey, aren't you killing the golden goose? Isn't this going bad? And people in Argentina say, well, we've got nice food, we've got some pretty good wines, we're having fun, we're still wealthier than Chile across the Andes, we're still wealthier than Brazil, we're still wealthier than, but we'll always be wealthier than Bolivia because they never seem to get their act together. They look around and they go, well, things aren't so bad. And people say, well, don't you know you were as wealthy as the United States of America at one point? And the wealthy people in that country, they already live here, or they already have bank accounts here. And they send their kids to college here. So there's a real problem, is that to some extent, you as a country can slide down and down and down and down in many cases before people figure out what's going on. Or people sign up for really goofy stuff that doesn't work, like communism. They think, oh, everything's going badly, so government's awful and it's destroying this country, so we'll sign up for full government control of everything. And then the reaction to that is a military dictatorship, and that's how those things go. So the scary thing, Ed, is that countries can slide. Ernie's always talking about a collapse. I disagree with, this is one of the areas where I disagree with Ernie, is I don't think we're going to see a collapse of the kind that Ernie's thinking about, where it becomes Mad Max and we're all out there with our guns on our motorcycles and, I don't think it happens like that. I think it happens more like Argentina, where it's just slowly, year after year, you start declining, and then you kind of wake up one day and you realize, wow, a lot of other countries are a lot wealthier than we are.
Okay, Tom,
and then you try to, and then you have something like the Falklands. Yeah.
Tom, the worth of the...
In 1980, we had Reagan come in. We had a Prop 13 movement around the country. You know what Prop 13 is in California, where you had property tax? I believe that the combined burden of federal spending, state and local spending, and inflationary monetary chaos. People get used to 2 or 3% inflation. People can manage that. When you've suddenly got inflation that's doing 10 or 15% a year, that starts to get weird. People have a lot of trouble with that, especially with the gas prices and when you get on the bad end of that whip. So at that point, I think government was probably, if you add up federal and state and the monetary chaos, you were probably about 50% of the economy was being redirected. Oh, and regulatory burdens. Probably at least 50% of our national income was being redirected and directly controlled by government in one way or another. And at that point in 1980, I think that was enough to tip Americans at least off of some kind of tipping point. So I think that was. Now the problem is as you keep going, the level gets higher because of economic growth. We're able to tolerate a lot more now, or say in 1980, we were able to tolerate a lot more government in 1980 because of economic growth. It took us to 50% before people finally like pushed back. In 1910, the U.S. government only took up, less than 10%. The whole government, everything, state and local, took up, and regulatory burdens, and there was no inflation, zero. There was mild deflation under the gold standard. So you basically had government taking up less than 10% of the economy. So, but my guess is that you would have seen a bigger pushback we could not have stood, just because of the level of economic growth, we couldn't have had 50% government. It would have absolutely killed us. There would have been some sort of revolution in 1910 if we had done that, if we'd gone to 50% that quickly. Does that make sense? The wealthier we get, the more government we can afford. And that's a bad thing in many ways, because that means we're probably going to means we're not getting back to 10% anytime soon.
Currently, the average worker that does a 40-hour, 8-hour day, 40-hour week is taxed between 25 and 30%. Is that about right?
If you add up everything, yeah. And the embedded income taxes and everything they buy.
That's the number I'm talking about.
Yeah.
John Q. Public getting his paycheck, okay, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. What percentage does it have to hit before he says, you're stealing from me?
It's weird. The problem is we don't really know, and part of it is the big X factor is ideology. If you're in a really goofy country like France, which has a very weak free enterprise ideology, it has a very weak freedom ideology. If you're in a place like Argentina with very weak freedom ideology, a lot of people belong to these very powerful labor unions that control politics in a big way. If you belong to situations like that, a lot of people are seeing you ideologically the wrong solution to the problems. So, in other words, people will continually, in Argentina, and in France, they keep re-electing these hardcore leftist, socialist, corporatist, fascist, whatever you want to call them. They keep re-electing these people who have bad solutions and aren't offering anything good. So, in a way, people are fed up, and they have churn. There's political churn going on, but they don't get on the right path. In other words, people get fed up in a sense, but then they think, oh, well, if I just join this labor union, we elect this guy, and they put in this program, things will be better. So that's my concern about that.
Give me a bottom line number.
What number? 75%.
When it hits this point.
Yeah, I think in America at this point, I was telling you in 1980.
Screw the French and screw the Argentinians. I'm talking America.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the short answer, Ed, is militant agnosticism. I don't know, and you don't know either. But if you want a number out there, I would say in 1980, I felt like I penciled this out. I think the burden was about 50%. My guess is we could tolerate about 55, 60% right now before people.
The TV brainwashes for 30 more years.
But the big X factor is ideology. Is if you're out there selling good solutions and making sure that people understand why things. If the whole answer, for instance, this latest economic snafu, if the whole reason for this economic snafu, if you believe, which I know you don't, but if you believed, like if you're John Q. Public and you believe that, the problem is big corporations and the capitalist system is just flawed and we didn't have enough government and they weren't regulating enough and that's why everything collapsed in 2007, okay, well then we've got a huge problem because then you're going to tolerate a whole lot more government ideologically. If you guys are out there educating people to make sure that people understand that that is not the reason why this whole thing happened. It happened because of the Federal Reserve. It happened because of overregulation. It happened because we've got crazy tax burdens already on people. If you're able to explain that to the public, it's a huge X factor. I mean, if the public is out there, if they've got the right ideas, then they look at the same situation and say, oh, I see, the solution is less government, not more government. So, I think the tipping point changes depending. Also, the more people have that worldview, the less big government they're willing to tolerate. So they won't tolerate 55%. And 55 for me, by the way, includes a huge regulatory burden. We currently tax about 10. The regulatory burden right now is about 10% of GDP It's about probably $1.5 trillion. When you add up the cost of complying with taxes, the cost of all this stuff, it's probably about 1/10 of the economy. So that's 10% right there. Federal government taxes currently, federal government tax is 20% of GDP right now, but it's spending, it's spending 25% of GDP. So that spending is changing things. Local government's about 15. So you're currently at about 50% right now. Our job as ideological movers and shakers is to get people to think that 50% is intolerable and that we need to, we have a huge influence. It's not a mechanical thing like you just hit a certain point. It all depends on what people think.
Well, Tom,
does that make sense?
Tom, are we effectively in excess of 100% taxation already? Effectively, if you count the impact of the printing of the money and you count the impact of spending things that they'll just think, well, get paid back in the future. And in other words, mortgaging us now, we're in fact spending more than we've had, and we've been doing that for so long.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. When I said 50%, that's a snapshot picture of right now. That does not include if we actually suddenly started trying to pay down, like imagine we were a corporation or a business of some sort, and we actually looked at our 50, 60-year time horizon and said, oh, we've got to start paying right now, put together a sinking fund to put money in to actually cover the future costs that we've promised. Yeah, it'd be a lot more than that. Just to give you an idea of how big it would be. If you look at the next 75 years and you count up everything you count up the bankruptcy, you count up everything that we've promised to all these people for which we have no tax stream to pay for right now, it's about $150 trillion. Medicare is, over the next 75 years, Medicare is about, I believe it's $89 trillion underwater. Now that's above and beyond all the taxes that we currently have for Medicare. It's the big one. Social Security is about 18, I believe the number is. The last I checked was about $18 trillion in the hole. It's not that big compared to Medicare, but it's gigantic. That's the size of our entire economy, what we produce in a year. It's more than what we produce in a year. Medicaid, a lot of times they don't count Medicaid because it's not technically an unfunded liability, because Medicaid is totally pay as you go, but we've promised essentially especially through Obamacare and the way Medicaid was going before that, we promised people trillions of dollars that we don't have over the next 75 years. I think they picked 75 because it's kind of a lifetime. It's a typical human lifetime. But if you start counting everything, the FDIC is underwater. Freddie and Fannie are underwater to a tune. They're actually relatively cheap. It's only about $500 billion. Last I saw, Freddie and Fannie were only $500 billion underwater for the next 70 years.
That was Jimmy Carter's.
Yeah. So anyway, when you count all this stuff, yeah, definitely. When you count all this stuff up, it's $150 trillion easily. And if you then assume that we're only going to, let's say we don't pay any of that. It's all going to be our kids. So we get off scot-free. There's 90 million kids in this country. You divide 150 trillion by 90 million kids, and you get $1.5 million per kid.
Indentured servitude.
Above and beyond what we are currently taxing people for now. So think about that for a second. Like $1.5 million per kid. Now, it's going to be easy for them because they'll have 50 years to pay it off, right? Because they're going to work for 50 years. So it's no problem, right? So
they're going to have kids.
Well, eventually, yeah, we can do a pyramid scheme on this thing. But I mean, just to get you the numbers, we're already in a pyramid scheme. Let's just keep it going. But I mean, the problem is probably our population is going to start declining at some point, and then the problems get even harder to manage. So if you think about it, 50 working years for your kid or your grandkid, $30,000 a year of extra stuff somehow that they're going to pay for above and beyond the taxes they currently pay. If we try to keep all of our promises that we've made to everybody, we've made them to. That is pretty darn, and that's gigantic. So you bring that forward.
Who's in favor of breaking some promises?
Right now.
That's tough. Now, this is where I also disagree with Ernie. I believe in something. I believe in Paul Ryan's plan. I believe it's the only thing on the table. I think it's the only thing that's possible on the table that's actually been scored, that actually has anybody's done any numbers on it. This is the scary thing about the Paul Ryan plan. Now, this is, and by the way, you can't even get all the Republicans in Congress to sign on to the Paul Ryan plan. This is scary stuff, because this is the only plan that's even halfway realistic to fix this whole thing. And the idea is that we're going to keep our promises to people over the age of 55. Now, I don't know how many of you hardcore libertarians think that that's a terrible idea, but I look at people who are over the age of 55. There's no one in here who's over the age of 55. But I look at people who are over the age of 55 and I say, gosh, I don't know if that guy's suddenly going to be able to go out and work for 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week to pay for his own retirement and health benefits at this point. I'm not sure that really works. So I believe we should keep, I believe, like Paul Ryan, I believe we should keep our promises to people who are over the age of 55. The scary thing about that, though, is you have to take on more debt. Even as you're letting the younger generation out of this crazy system, you have to take on a little bit more debt in order to make this. And we don't truly make this country solvent for 50 years.
I believe those that made promises should keep them. Those that made those promises should fund it out of their own pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where I stopped being a super hardcore libertarian. Is I think at some point, yeah, we shouldn't have made those promises. But once someone's 55, 60, 65, I don't expect them to go out suddenly and I don't expect to cut them off of all their benefits tomorrow.
Tom,
he's been waiting a long while.
Yeah. I'd like to have a mic. I hate to throw cold water on your speech, but you're supposed to be here under freedom. I got news for you. You're barking up the wrong tree. You sit over here and you talk about the people and the retirement and everything, and for every dollar that's on that credit card, the banks get $1,000. If you will type in the list audit of the Federal Reserve, you'll find out that we gave the banks $16 trillion, and that's on top of what's over here. And you got the audacity to talk about the Social Security that people paid for, a libertarian or whatever you are. How many of you say that you're Christians? How many adults will you feed to make sure one child goes to bed with a full stomach? You got to ask yourself that. And none of your meetings that I've ever been to, did you ever call the U.S. government the Antichrist? What else are they? Why is it that I'm speaking up in front of the mic, people that's supposed to be independent and trying to change a system, and then he's getting voted into the system? And he says the same thing about the school board over here, that you can't do anything in the school situation. What do you think this congressman's going to do? He got the same battle to fight. Now, if you're going to join the system, you're not going to get anything done. It has to be a turnover. Now, one of the things that you people don't know is that there's a 167-page indictment against the federal judges in California. And that was turned over to the provost marshal. Now, how many of you realize that the provost marshal is over the jury, it's over the court system? They are in complete control of the United States. Now, that's the provost marshal. And you sit here and talk about nickel and dime stuff, and the bank getting $1,000 for every dollar you borrow. And yet that is not the issue here. What you're doing is you're praying in church and the government's coming behind you and cutting your throat. And the longer you sit up here and preach this stuff without preaching real change, you will end up with nothing.
I think applies all this, and I'll let Tom take some more questions. He said, we are just tired, we are just looking for the truth on every issue. And we don't all know it all. None of us. I don't, none of us do. But we're looking for the truth, we're looking for basically self-ownership, and we're looking for our liberty back. And so we're doing it different ways, and I agree with Tom, the last thing that should go is the elderly pension. I mean, the corporate taxes would pay for that. But that it was based on a lie and stuff needs to be dealt with as well. So let Tom take some more questions.
Yeah, and as far as as far as government being antichrist, I don't want to get too spiritual realistic on you or religious on you, but amen. I mean, if you've got people out there who are not taking care of their neighbor because they think government is going to do it for them, they're not taking care of poor kids, they're not taking care of widows and orphans. That's a huge problem. And a lot of people in this country, a lot of people in the world have, even people who profess to be Christians, have basically ceded the field. They've said, you know, yeah, I know it's my biblical duty, but I'll let some government bureaucrat try to take care of everybody. I'll turn it over to a government program. And that's not the way this country was founded, and it's not the way, I'm pretty sure, you've read Romans 13, the first 7 verses, and Paul says government to punish wrongdoers. And that is the only positive vision Paul or anybody else in the New Testament has for government, is that government is ordained by God to punish wrongdoers. And I think most of y'all are libertarians. You define wrongdoing pretty darn narrowly. Force, fraud, things like that. So that's a very, very small government. That doesn't include huge social programs. I was just saying, now that we've got so many people dependent, and this is what Ron Paul has said, is once we've got so many people in this country dependent on government right now for old age security, and they never had to be that way, but that's the way things have been for the last 80 years, we can't just pull the plug on people. And I agree with that.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. No, Frank, everyone else gets to ask, but not you.
Then this gentleman down here. How can a logical, moral, ethical bunch of men and women allow us to get into this situation?
No, they aren't.
It's
Because they're not
Very slow to time.
yeah, I mean,
That's the opposite of what you say.
yeah.
You know,
Friedrich, yeah, Fred.
It's done on purpose.
Yes, it is.
It's done on purpose. It has to be.
Yeah, Frederick Bastiat, I call him Fred, who's a Frenchman.
And we've allowed them to do it.
Yeah, Frederick Bastiat said, 150 years ago that the state is that great fiction by which everyone seeks to live at the expense of everyone else, and that is a huge moral problem for people, is the desire to live off of something else. And
Europe and the United States.
it's everybody.
And a number of other things.
I've been to a lot of places, and it's the same human beings there. It's one of the reasons why people often say, oh, libertarians, you think everyone's going to be good. The reason we have a free society, you just think everyone's good and everyone's going to do right. No. I mean, I think a lot of us are kind of Calvinists, original sin types, or whatever. We believe people actually, many cases, tend to go bad. And that's one of the reasons you don't want to give anybody enough power to take huge amounts of taxes away from people. If people are bad, why would you give them all that power? It makes absolutely no sense. So, and I do want to talk about Federal Reserve. I'd be happy to talk about that, but let's go questions.
Okay, anyone who takes the time to try and understand what's going on, do the reading, do some research, becomes cynical. I don't believe a word I hear. Now your group, I've never heard this group before, what is it, Americans for Prosperity Arizona? I still don't know what your group is, but you passed around a sheet to sign up for email. Well, number one, you said, I do not think you should run for school board. Your little sheet passed right by me. What in the hell are you talking about? Don't run for school board. What is it about the school board that is so bad?
He wouldn't say
That's one of the
don't
easiest
run.
things. That is one of the easiest things you can get involved with. Is the school board. I just don't. I'm very suspicious that you're telling us don't run for the school board.
You say you're not
What
gonna
the hell is that?
You're not gonna
I just think that the school board is so thoroughly inundated with government.
Please.
It's completely.
What is it?
The school board system is so completely inundated with government. It's a government from top to bottom. The people who get on school board, for the most part, either get there, or they survive on that school board because they kowtow to the spending interests that run those districts, and it's just a very, very tough nut to crack. Also, you have a sympathy problem. A lot of the parents out there have no idea. You ask parents out there. Ask parents out there, do a survey, ask them, are we spending enough in our K-12 public schools? The answer will be overwhelmingly no. Boy, we're really just starving our schools for money. And you ask them, hey, do you actually know how much we spend per kid in this public school system in Arizona? And they go, no. And if they've got some kind of a propaganda sheet from the union, maybe they'll throw a number. It changes, but sometimes they'll throw a number at you like 3,500 or 5,500. The actual number is well north of 8,000 if you count all the capital money. So, and if you don't count the capital money, it's about and there's some fudging with those statistics, but if you don't count the capital money, it's about, let's call it 7,000, just to keep the math easy. 7,000 per kid in our public school system. Now you're a basic math guy, you can do basic math. 25 kids in a typical Arizona classroom. 7,000 times 25 kids. You're all following me on this? $175,000. Not capital. This is beyond capital. So we've got $175,000 potentially if you divide it up per kid in that classroom. That's quite a lot of money. No, you got to have some. You got to have.
That's assuming 25 kids, and usually you have more than that.
Well, supposedly the average, and I don't know whether I believe it, but supposedly the average is 25 because there's a lot of special classes that only have 20. So most of the classes you're thinking of where your kids are, they're going to be in a classroom full of 30 kids. But just think about the numbers for a second. $7,000 per kid. If anybody wants to bet, I love betting money on this because I talk to teacher union people and I usually have to pull out money and say, look, I'll bet you $100 that if we go to the superintendent's report, it'll show a figure for your school district over $7,000 in non-capital money per kid. So that's $175,000 potentially in a classroom. Now you got to have a principal, right? So you got to peel off a little bit of that for overhead. You got to let's have a nurse, let's have a guidance counselor, let's put some in the library, let's do some, you got to pay the coach a little bit or a teacher at least to coach after school. Let's pay a little bit out of that. All right, so let's peel off some overhead for that. You still have potentially over $150,000, $125,000 if you're really generous to admin in a classroom. Now, how many of you talked to a school teacher lately? Are they making? Is your person you live with? Is that person making $125,000? Are there two teachers in that classroom both making 65 or 62? I don't think so. There's an immense amount of waste in this system, and all the people who are wasting all that money and all the people who are in the system, they are all living off of it, and they really, really, really don't want you running for school board. That's the short answer on that one.
Yeah, running for school board is basically a fool's errand.
It's kind of nice to have one. If one person wants to run into the cannon fodder, it's nice to have one person because then you have a whistleblower. Then you at least have someone who can leak out to the public and say, look, we're wasting just an immense amount of money here. And there's nothing you can do about it, but at least short term, there's not much you can do about it. Basically, what we need to do is get our kids out of the government schools as quickly as possible. And if you have kids, get your kids out of the government schools as quickly as possible.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of questions when I go through them. I know you've been waiting a long time.
Yeah, I want to go back to, first comment, when you talked about the entitlements that are going to come due, we need to repudiate the Wall Street debt that we're currently paying through the bailouts. Plain and simple, end them. But something you said earlier I have to take issue with in part, not in total. I don't believe the Rothschilds and Rockefellers push a button and the world falls into line. That is a conspiracy theory. But it's not a conspiracy theory to look at what billionaires and some of their minions and colleagues do to our public resources and what they're currently doing. For example, on my radio show, we're now investigating the attempted takeover of the entire water system of Colorado. And they have designs on Arizona next. And it's not a theory. It's not that we suppose. We have the public documents. It's called the Colorado Water Alliance, and there are a whole host of subgroups that carry out these duties for this purpose so they can hide what they're doing by compartmentalizing it. And to say that these billionaires aren't up to no good is craziness. They are. And they're picking us apart one issue at a time.
And a billionaire is like you and me, same sort of flawed human being, but with more money.
Yeah,
that's right.
We need to pay attention to these people.
Oh, and here's a huge thing. He makes a great point.
They're more dangerous than school boards. They're more dangerous than Governor Brewer. They're more dangerous than any elected official because they do the NGOs, the PPPs, and they operate outside public purview.
Here's something. That's where I was going with this. Is that if whenever you get into a government private-public partnership, you have to be extremely careful because that's the intersection. I mean, obviously, when government just runs something, you know that's going to be a big money pit and it's going to be bad. But then a lot of times these things are public-private, and you go, oh gosh, well maybe if the private sector, if we give them taxpayer money or give them some sort of monopoly privilege or something like that, and we let them run it, it'll be better. And in many cases, it actually does end up being more efficient. You have to be extremely careful. Just because you turn part of something over to the private sector with people who are wealthy and trying to make money off the thing, that should be a big flag in your head that there might be a problem with this. We know government wastes money, But if government money or government privilege of some sort is going to a private corporation or a private business or private billionaire or whatever, that should also be a huge red flag for us.
Well, you said Agenda 21 earlier. Try its subgroup called ICLEI.
Oh yeah.
That's going to take all of our resources. Folks, I'm telling you right here, your water is at risk. And it's coming here right now. ICLEI. And I don't mean to dominate, but I'm telling you, this is the issue, because if we let these people get control of our water, they absolutely control us. It doesn't matter what the tax rate is.
In many instances, foreign countries.
By the way, I did want to talk about monetary policy
Spain.
a little bit. One thing is just to, with the Federal Reserve, I think the Federal Reserve is very dangerous, but not necessarily for exactly the same reason that you do. The reason I think they're extremely dangerous is because I believe they create most of the boom-bust credit cycle. This is typical Austrian. Everybody knows Austrian economic business cycle theory. Okay, Austrian business cycle theory. I basically go with most of that, which is the central bank in a country is the main thing driving the boom and bust in the credit. Expanding bank deposits, expanding the effective amount of money that's out there in the system, and then allowing it to collapse again. And so they create an immense amount of chaos. And when they do that, you get well, first of all, you get a lot of people who get a bunch of jobs in the economy for things that aren't going anywhere, and then they have to be let go. So you get huge unemployment. This is basically what causes recessions. So that in itself is chaotic enough, and I think a big problem. In the big long-term picture, there's this idea that among a lot of people that it is this monetary policy which enables the government to go into debt. And I think actually, I'll probably get some pushback on this. I think it's the other way around. I think governments desire to spend a ton of money, and that then they create a special relationship with central banks. But the truth is that in the modern financial economy, the global economy, it is much harder now for governments to simply monetize away the debt. We've heard it for years. It has happened historically. If you held government bonds during the 70s, did you do well? No, you got hosed. But the average maturity now on a U.S. Federal debt is very, very short. About every 2 years, the U.S. government has to go out and float a whole new series of bonds and get people to buy them for about half of what they have outstanding. About half the bonds come due every 2 years. So think about it for just a second. You're a government that has debt. You plan to stay in debt for a long time, as this government plans to stay in debt for a long time under even the best scenario. They're going to keep staying in debt. So you have to go out and float for half of your debt that you want. You have to go out and float that tomorrow, new, in the market. As a government, does it help you trying to sell bonds to people if inflation is going crazy? Do people want to buy your bonds? No. Or you have to offer them the most outrageously high interest rate to stay on top of that inflation. So one of the weird, strange things about the modern world is that, ironically, if you want low inflation, it's good to have a government that's in debt, because the government is out there floating new bonds, and they don't want the inflation to scare everyone away from the bonds. It's a strange. It doesn't make sense, but I can give you a link on this by Jeffrey Rogers Hummel, who writes for the Freeman. Really interesting. I think people who are really acquainted with economics understand this, but a lot of us who've looked at monetary policy, we're looking at the old-fashioned model where governments were able to unload huge amounts of debt through inflation. And it's really, really hard to do that in the modern world. I think it's more likely that we'll see a gigantic default. What the government does is get everybody, float a huge amount of debt, even bigger than what we're doing now, something that will take up debt for decades of their proposed debt. The thing they want to do is they want to sell you the debt, sell you the bonds at a fixed interest rate, a fixed, not a tip, a treasury inflation protected, but just sell you a straight interest rate on that, make it look really attractive, possibly through, if we ever do personal retirement accounts or something like that, force Americans to buy bonds, force Americans to buy that government debt, put a huge amount of that debt out into people's pockets, and then a couple decades down the road, default on it. That's, I think, the most likely scenario for how the government would screw large numbers of us through. And they don't even have to destroy the currency to do that. You can have a strong currency and just completely, Russia did that in the late 90s. They hosed a huge number of bondholders, but didn't destroy their currency.
We got about 20 minutes. You've been waiting a while to bounce around the question.
I'm on your email list, so I get your emails, and I like some of the things you do, especially with the local stuff and the competition in municipal services. I want to help your group out, but sometimes I get worried that if I do anything to help your group, I'll just end up supporting a neocon warmonger. So I just want what your opinion is and what the opinion and what the policies of the group Americans for Prosperity in general are of how much they're willing to support warmongers, because I don't want war, because if you go to war, you pretty much destroy your fiscal situation because it's expensive to have war. If you have war, you have central economic planning because the economy needs to be redirected towards the war effort. You lose your civil liberties because they got to spy on you, make sure you're not the enemy, and I think a free market is a civil liberty. I want to be free to trade. So if you have a whole bunch of war, it pretty much destroys all of the goals that Americans for Prosperity is trying to accomplish. So are they taking precautions not to support any warmongers?
Well, we don't support any candidates anywhere for public office. We don't support any candidates. So as far as individual warmongers, that's a, we're not supporting any individual candidates anyway. So, but as far as policy is concerned, yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that's out there is, if you look at everything we support, like you go through everything we've ever supported, we've never supported spending on the military-industrial complex. In fact, we've supported cutting the budget. Our budget looks a lot like Ron Paul's, our 10-year budget. I love the Ron Paul 10-year budget. I don't think Ron Paul is saying enough about what we do about the entitlement crisis, but we signed up for huge cuts in spending. We believe a lot of Republicans rather were worried. Remember the debt ceiling deal? There was going to be what they call sequestrations. There was going to be automatic defense cuts in that whole thing. And me and my national policy people were like, a lot of Republicans are going, gosh, boy, this is really tough. You can't cut the military. It was a time, we're talking 5% of the military budget that they wanted to cut. And we're looking at that going, okay, where's the problem? Anyway, you're never going to find anywhere where we support huge amounts of war spending. It's all government spending. I mean, everybody knows it's not like money suddenly becomes magically efficient when it's in the hands of Pentagon spenders. Now, you do need, at some point you need national defense. We've got to have some kind of foreign policy. I don't know what it is, but that's not our business. We're a fiscal policy shop, so.
Renee, do you still have a question?
I lost it.
Oh,
man.
Yes.
Okay. Regarding the Federal Reserve, the only figure I've heard bandied about is $5 trillion, which is how much the Federal Reserve is holding in government debt. But we're talking about the unaudited Federal Reserve. They might be holding a lot more. If just seize the Federal Reserve, and since they created it, they can do it, that wipes out about at least $5 trillion in federal debt right there.
Part of the problem with a modern financial banking system is that, and this is good and bad, and most of the time we see the bad side of the money multiplier, of the, what do we call it, fiat money. And the, you understand the deal. You put $10 in a bank, and they lend 9 of it to another bank, and 8 to the next bank, and 8, because of the reserve ratio. So you end up having this huge multiplication. So part of the problem with the government trying to extinguish its debt is that in order to do that through inflation, you're going to get so much more inflation than you need. In other words, there's a huge, every time the government every time there's a real dollar that's created, it gets multiplied in the private banking system so that people think there's $10 out there. Those $10 are not being used to retire government debt. Only the one. So the problem for modern governments this is one of those weird things where fractional reserve banking, which I'm against, sort of, that's a real long story. But anyway, fractional reserve banking, which is a big problem. in terms of creating the business cycle and all that stuff. Fractional reserve banking, in a weird way, puts a brake on government creating inflation. Because in order to retire a certain amount of debt, they will have to create so much fiduciary media that they will rapidly create hyperinflation. And remember, they have to go out and sell bonds the next year.
What do you mean by fiduciary media?
Fiduciary, it's a Ludwig von Mises term about, it's the magic money. It's the, you actually take a green piece of paper that's $100 and you put it in the bank. That's not, there may be problems with paper money, but that's not the fiduciary media. The fiduciary media is when banks create that as a deposit, enter some numbers in a computer, and say, go ahead and then loan out that money, loan out $90 of it, and they have 10 on the books, but then the next bank thinks that but they're pretending to have $100 in the bank still.
Yeah.
They've actually lent out 90 of it, goes to the next guy, the next bank, they lend out, $81 of it while leaving $9 in the bank, and on and on and on. The fiduciary media is all of the magic money that isn't even in green pieces of paper that the whole banking system thinks is out there, and that is a huge problem. Yeah, that's a huge problem. And then when that comes, when everybody realizes that there isn't that much money out there, that's when everything collapses back in on itself.
Are you saying that if Congress did seize the Fed, there would be a collapse?
Not necessarily.
I'm saying that they could just take it whole in and say, okay, now it's zero.
Yeah. Okay. So they get rid of $5 trillion of debt, but like we just talked about, they have another $10 trillion out there, and that's just the current debt. Then they're going to have to go out under what we've been talking about. They're going to have to go out and try to put $150 trillion of new debt out to the public over the next 75 years. So governments can definitely screw over a large number of people with a default or with a quick hyperinflation or something like that. They can do that, but the problem is people won't lend them money for a while. Argentina does this about every 20 or 30 years, and you have to wait for a whole new crop of dumb investors to come through who go, oh gosh, Argentina, boy, that looks like an interesting place to invest. And so they basically buy into Argentina. So Argentina is able to completely wipe out a bunch of investors and creditors about every 20 or 30 years. But if you've got a year-to-year problem, it's really hard to float debt.
We got time for 2 more 1-minute questions.
It's debt money, it has to collapse.
Disagree with you on the point that there's a low inflation rate.
Louder, please.
The government, the banks have found a way around that. U.S. bonds aren't being sold on the open market. They're being sold back to the Federal Reserve, who's in turn creating more money. Quantitative easing is pumping trillions of dollars into the economy. We're not at 2% or 3% inflation. We're probably at about 11 or 12% inflation now, and it's going up dramatically. It just takes longer for people to see the results of it. But their massive debt is not keeping the inflation rate low. They found a way around it, and that's how they're doing it. They're just buying it back themselves and then putting out more money and more fractional reserves. If you look at the derivatives around the world, which the banks are trying to put taxpayers of the world, we're seeing that in Greece, we're seeing it in Portugal and everything else, 90% of that debt was from the derivatives of that, and that's about $1.5 quadrillion that they're trying to spread that debt around the world. So what they're doing, if you've got any savings at all, it is systematically being looted through inflation. Their official figures are 2%, it's 11, 12% right now, and it will continue to go higher because they have to keep feeding the interest on all these obligations that they're assuming. So the problem is much worse than what...
Yeah, a lot of that counterparty stuff just vanishes into thin air. Part of the problem is that with the bailouts, is the people in the corner offices of Goldman Sachs and Merrill and all these people, they got a lot of the bailout money. So and they're the ones who were out there making these crazy bets. Now a lot of those bets just ended up vanishing into thin air, and that's part of the collapse. But I mean, I look around. I just got a pretty good meal for $8.75. So, I'm not saying that inflation is not a problem. It absolutely isn't. It's always a danger, and governments will be tempted to do a sudden more likely than is to do a devaluation, like Argentina did 8 years ago. You wake up one morning and it says new dollar announced, and anyone who's holding that green paper gets to redeem. You get to redeem your old dollars for the new ones at a very unattractive rate.
They're basically doing that continuously with quantitative easing. You know where quantitative using 3, 4, 5, whatever, and they are devaluing the currency you have in hand, because if you walk out, you're going to pay 30% more for groceries in that. How do they get around that? Well, we don't count that in the consumer price index.
It is technically possible. I don't know if they're going to do it, but it's technically possible for the Federal Reserve to suck that money back in. I mean, Paul Volcker managed to suck a lot of that excess back in 1981. And that was wrenching, real interest rates went up, and we had a wrenching depression or recession. But I think in doing that, basically convince creditors, convince business people that, hey, America's going to get its act together on monetary policy, or at least, return to normal instead of having the craziness post 1971. So that demonstrated that we could suck some of that money back in. The question is, will they? I don't know.
All right, Tom, thank you for coming.
Thank you. We have our drawing here in a few minutes. I think some of the numbers you have to look at, I think the whole thing's a big Ponzi, because there's $705 trillion in credit default swaps out there. That's his counterparty thing that Tom was talking about. There's only $50 trillion in the entire world. So how are you going to pay it off? I believe for every 3 years of pensions, 3 years of bonds you actually only have 3 weeks worth of wealth. I think it's all lies. All these paper assets are fraudulent. And we're going to come to a nasty reckoning when that comes out. And what I think we just need to go back to freedom and back to real. No one puts a dollar in circulation they didn't work for, and all this Ponzi, all these people that are very powerful versus the weak, a lot of will end. Anyway, our drawing. So who gets to pick?
They're picked. We had the most honest pickers in the house pick 'em.
Right on.
First choice is 2862. 2862.
Yo, right here, man.
Hey, how about that, Pat?
I get a book for the back.
Yeah, on the back table there are the books. I think got some pretty good ones there today. 2879.
Whoa.
2879. Hey, we got them today. Great. Okay, one more here. 2863. 2863. Got it?
Right on.
Very good. All right, thank you guys for coming.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
We work in Liberty in different ways, and sometimes we disagree. I'll work with Occupy. I'll work with John Burstein. I don't care in certain areas. Other areas I'll fight like heck with them. Push liberty and push the stopping the lie. That's what I'm going to be doing. I don't want to run for Congress. It's detestable. But since I am running, it's going to be get the government out of your way. That's my platform. Americans rediscovering liberty, and those that want to go ahead and do that piece of paper and run as a write-in, I'm going to be writing. I wrote up a little platform. I'm just going to send out masses of news press releases, and then maybe we'll educate to probably get 2 or 3 debates, and you'll get press releases in your name. You can make up your own stuff. You can take some of my stuff. I don't care. We're just going to get the people thinking about liberty and about the nonsense that's going on. Thanks for coming.